obsolescence and counterfeiting, the open market and those opportunities and risks, as well as prevention and solutions, the role of data, and how to select a partner. Then lastly, we'll go over quality management and counterfeit avoidance and detection systems. We'll conclude today's session with a Q&A section. We just ask that you submit your questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a screenshot right there so you can see where to place those questions. Finally, I will repeat the questions for our speakers to answer. We do hope to get to all of your questions, but we also want to respect your time and keep this to a 1-hour webinar. Any unanswered questions will be followed up offline, and we'll send a copy of all of the FAQs afterwards. Lastly, today's webinar is being recorded, and all attendees will be sent a copy at the end, as well as it will be available on our website. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Enda Ruddy. Enda is the Global Director for Converge. Enda, the floor is yours.
Laura, thank you very much for the introduction, and indeed to yourself and your SiliconExpert colleagues for inviting us to join this joint webinar today. For the last number of years, we've really enjoyed the series of webinars, particularly those around obsolescence and counterfeit avoidance. So, Laura, you've given an introduction to the agenda. Before I begin and start getting into the detail and moving through the slides, I'll just give the audience a little bit more of an idea of what to expect from the webinar today from the Converge section. So later on, along with Jeff Williams from SiliconExpert, I'll be joined from two of my colleagues who are based in our head office near Boston, and that is Dwight Girardi. Dwight is the head of global quality for Converge, a position he's held for over a decade. And alongside Dwight is Mark Baldiga. Mark is one of our global commodity managers for ICs, and Mark is particularly involved in services to our high reliability customers. Okay, so what can we expect to cover over the next hour? Well, obsolescence, of course, is the subject that unites us all here. And we heard before we joined the webinar that there's been a lot of interest and attendance on this topic, and it doesn't surprise us. For the last number of years, Converge has been involved in efforts, whether it is through associations like the International Institute of Obsolescence Management or our own efforts in the future of obsolescence management. And what we notice is that this topic is an absolutely hot topic in this industry, and that goes beyond the traditional markets such as aerospace and defense. It's really spreading beyond that. So as Laura mentioned, we're going to look at some traditional trends in obsolescence and one other major trend that's emerging today. We'll talk a little bit about what impact could that have over the next few years on obsolescence management. Now, the aftermarket for obsolete components is estimated to be in the year 2020 around 1.2 billion. It's a significant aftermarket. And a lot of this aftermarket is played out in the open market or independent market space. And that is a market space where I think it's not very well known. IDC and Gartner don't produce reports on this marketplace. So I'll explain a little bit more the general business models behind it and the key players. We'll talk about obsolescence and its link to counterfeiting, because those two topics, unfortunately, tend to go hand in hand. And then we'll move into solutions, where Jeff Williams from SiliconExpert will talk about the data offering, and Dwight and Mark will talk about their subject matter expert areas, which is vendor management and also quality, QMS, and counterfeit detection, before we break for questions. So before I move on to the next slide around obsolescence, so I think obsolescence management has been covered in very good detail in some previous webinars, in particular the sessions from Professor Peter Sanborn from Cal State University of Maryland, and also Dr. Diganta Das, also from the University of Maryland, who spoke particularly about counterfeiting. So we won't try to repeat what those experts have said on the topic, but instead look at what we are seeing and we are experiencing from our vantage point in the open market. Now, obsolescence has been driven for a number of years by some very traditional forces. For example, the directives of Reach and Ross has had a very big impact. Also, part number normalization. And whether in the audience today you're an expert in obsolescence management or you're coming to this topic fresh, I think everybody can identify that one of the key drivers over the last few years has been simply the dynamic pace of change in the marketplace of electronic components. We understand Moore's law, but recently Thomas Friedman, in his latest book, talks about Moore's law leading into what he's calling the age of acceleration, where the pace of technological change is outstripping our ability to keep up with it. And that's a key driver in very simple terms of obsolescence management, and a traditional one, that literally the people whose responsibility is to produce machines for a long period of time, their ability to get components that they've designed in is being outstripped by the pace of change. So they are what we would consider to be traditional drivers of obsolescence. And there's differing opinions of where the marketplace is going on this. For example, SiliconExpert and Arrow are tracking product change notifications and product discontinuation notifications over many years. And what they've noticed is that in the 4 years leading up to 2016, there's been a trebling in the amount of those notifications. So that would indicate that the rate of obsolescence is increasing dramatically. And Jeff will talk about that in more detail a little bit later on. But not everyone feels this way. The organization I'm involved in within Arrow, FOM, the Future of Obsolescence Management, produces a quarterly booklet in which we interview leading experts globally in obsolescence management. And one of them, Willie Brown from BAE Systems, talked about, in his experience, more of a flattening in recent years. And in Peter Sanborn's lecture recently in this series, he also said that the rates of obsolescence had peaked at a very significant amount over the last couple of years, but remain very significant. So what is happening? Is this problem accelerating? Is this problem stabilizing? What's going to happen next? There are dissenting voices, but I think everybody agrees that it's an extremely significant problem. Now, I'll just move to my next slide, which talks about a market force that could be coming into play. Okay, just a moment, my slide jumped forward. Okay, so over the last couple of years, mergers and acquisitions within the electronic component manufacturers has been absolutely dramatic. In around 2 years, over half of the marketplace has been affected. And we look at the quote there in quotation marks from Deloitte, from the review from 2012, job one on day 2 is product line rationalization. And in plain terms, what that means is that there is an expectation or a fear that the chip manufacturers, after they finish the consolidation period of merging, will begin to look at the less profitable lines and begin to cut. Now, we haven't yet seen the effects of it. In fact, when we looked at figures for 2017, we weren't seeing a big spike in obsolescence cases as we had in the previous 4 years. But if we consider the recent example of Altera, where they went through a very large EOL in June, that was a really enormous example in terms of the customers affected, the number of part numbers, and the sheer revenue. And we're really going to watch with interest over the next few quarters. Are we going to see that dramatic spike again in obsolescence cases? It's certainly a dramatic market force that should have a very big impact on the cases of obsolescence. And again, there's quite a bit of debate in the communities and in the discussions that we are part of. For example, John Anslow, who's the head of the International Institute of Obsolescence Management, we were talking with him recently at an industry event, and he really talked about that it is a very hot topic, but the jury is out on what effect it will have. But I think this is something we all need to be aware of and monitoring over the next number of quarters. So, who is principally affected by obsolescence, and who are the people that are coming to Converge and to Arrow's obsolete division supply assurance for solutions in this area? Well, there's quite a simple rule of thumb. The smaller the market size a manufacturer is involved in, and if they have to support a product for a long period of years, they're generally dealing with or struggling with the challenge of obsolescence. And that's the general rule of thumb that follows. Now, when we look at this next slide, that gives a little bit more color to that quite simple statement. In the top left-hand side, you see the aerospace and defense customers. Manufacturers that we understand need to support product for very many years, and they have a relatively small market size compared to the consumer market in the bottom right-hand side. Now, what does that mean? Well, Department of Defense in America estimations from around 30 years ago had the cost of a redesign at around $250,000 in each case. And that is a relatively modest sum. These days, those same costs are estimated to run to tens of millions. The leverage of this group and the pace at which they can change, for reasons I think we all understand, are very limited. So they are really in the crosshairs of where the obsolescence issue hits. So what I'm really interested to know after this webinar, to get the statistics back, is where did the people who registered for this webinar come from? Because what we notice is that in terms of demand for obsolete components from Converge, 60% are from that market, aerospace and defense, which makes sense that the majority would be from this marketplace. But increasingly, in the last number of years, those other spheres that you see are coming into play. Transportation, particularly rail, some automotive, are companies that seem to be experiencing the same challenges as well. Industrial, medical, communications, all the way down on this list, really to industrial automation. The consumer and lighting guys still redesign. They still can change and they're very, very flexible. But what we're seeing is that aerospace and defense tend to be the people who were first on the committees, the people who were first organized around legislation and industry efforts to combat the challenge of obsolescence. But it's definitely a challenge that is spilling over into more industries as the technological change continues. And we wonder, with the merger and acquisition effect, how this will change in the next few years. So at the top of the presentation, I referenced the previous webinars by Professor Sanborn and Dr. Das at Calci. Now, one of the first remarks that are made about obsolescence is that when you begin to look at counterfeiting components, so namely fake components that have been deliberately manufactured or altered to appear to be a different component, if we look at all of the reported cases, over 50%, almost 60% of all reported cases are parts that are past their end-of-life date. Now, I talked earlier about the EOL market being significant and growing, but in the relative scheme of things compared to the whole semiconductor market, it's really very small. And if more than half of cases of counterfeits or obsolescence, it's very clear counterfeiters, criminals who set out to profit from fake components, are deliberately targeting obsolete components. So that's why these two topics have to be treated hand in hand. If you're suffering from one, obsolescence, it's very likely you'll be under risk for suffering from the other unless you're very well organized and informed and have the correct plans and processes in place, which Mark and Dwight will talk about later on. So what are the counterfeit costs? Well, clearly any counterfeit case can be absolutely catastrophic. We know that from the Senate Arms Committee around 2007, that there was a very lucky escape in terms of the Department of Defense. But we attended the anti-counterfeiting forum in the UK recently, and some of the statistics which just applied to North America was that Counterfeiting was estimated to cost around 7 billion to the economy. This is just on electronic components. It cost 11,000 jobs, and there was a huge amount of downtime of line down situations. So they are at least quantifiable costs that we can associate with this problem. It's well understood. There are very strict legislative and government and industry, work being done to limit it, but nevertheless, every encounter with the open market, every time you go out of direct chain of custody from the chip manufacturer to a franchise to a customer, there is an element of risk. And that's why the terminology is counterfeit product mitigation. It's never removing the risk entirely. And when you look at the industry reaction to this and the government, what's very heartening about it is that it's very much a community effect. What we'll see when we attend industry events is you will see absolute competitors collaborating openly and sharing best practice in counterfeit detection and mitigation plans, and that's really commonplace. I mentioned the ERAI recently as being a source of statistics and information on counterfeiting. We're also a member of the IDEA. They are the group or the body most usually associated with certifying the component inspectors that should be inspecting every open market shipment. We're members of the Component Obsolescence Group in Germany, who are a sister to the International Institute of Obsolescence Management. Dwight will talk later on about the work of the SAE and particularly the G19 committee. I won't go through an exhaustive list, but if you're approaching this topic for the first time, there's certainly very many associations that you can join that will be able to help you understand and begin to address these key challenges. Okay, so what is the independent marketplace and why is it significant? Well, the independent marketplace is where most obsolete components are bought and sold. And as a result, that's where there's risk. So let's just take a little bit of time to try and understand that marketplace, because again, IDC and Gartner don't typically produce reports on this marketplace. It's estimated to be anywhere between 10 and 20 billion. And it's a marketplace that hasn't been consolidated, which means that there are literally thousands of players in it. So how does it operate? Well, a franchise distributor has a very well-defined supply chain. They have contracts in place with chip manufacturers. Under those strict contract terms with value-added services, they will supply to the end customers. The independent marketplace operates as an independent or open market. A typical order in the open market or the independent market will be one particular OEM has an obsolete issue. On the other hand, a competitor or a supplier to them that they're not aware of has that exact same component within the right conditions they need, and in between will be an independent distributor that will buy, test, verify the parts in collaboration with the end customer and supply that. Okay, the channels are listed there. They will buy from manufacturers directly, from other franchises, from the EMS and OEM channels, and they'll buy from each other. And what is bought and sold in this marketplace? Well, literally all of the electronic components that you can imagine. Okay, now that's the selling motion in the marketplace. But some terminology which is useful to understand about it. By dictionary definition, a broker is a middle person who sits in the middle and facilitates deals between two parties. But a broker in this marketplace has come to take on some negative connotations. And that's why you'll hear the term independent distributor versus a broker. And words are important in this case. It's not a strict definition, but when you hear the term broker and you understand it has a negative association, what you're typically talking about is a small operation that's very opportunistic. They wait for a customer to have a problem and then they will try and source the parts and profiteer in that situation. An independent distributor, on the other hand, is probably a global company with an established QMS, with a data capability to run proactive analytics for their customers. They will have certifications such as, but not limited to, AS 9120 or AS 6081, and they're very much a partner to both the supplier and the end customer in this marketplace. Okay. Now we're just going to move, having sort of established the some of the drivers behind obsolescence in the market where a lot of this takes place. Let's take a look at some of the solutions around this marketplace, but also around data. So, solutions for an imperfect supply chain. What services does an independent distributor provide? Well, three very simple services. Shortages. At the moment, many of you will be aware that for almost the last entire 12 months, there has been a memory chip and memory module shortage in the marketplace globally. It began in Asia, spread to America, and then latterly towards Q1 of last year, where I'm based in Europe, we began to experience it as well. And this is expected to continue for a number of months. It's simply a shortage on active components that have not passed their end-of-life date. This is not obsolescence. And what service is provided by an independent distributor? In agreement with the customer, they source the parts, verify them, and ship them quickly. Next is excess inventory. Last year, Future Electronics made a press release estimating that the potential market for excess components globally was somewhere in the region of 20 million, namely perhaps twice the size of the estimated size of the independent market space in general. So what they were talking about there is simply when a manufacturer has had a change in production planning or a build cancelled, they will be left with components they can't return and sit on their books, and they look for solutions through the independent channel. And it's a good independent distributor has a very good network and again a data capability that is able to help the manufacturer understand the liquidity of those parts in the marketplace. And then finally, around obsolescence, the key topic today is really a consultative approach around services mitigating the impact of obsolescence, and again, very data-led. To give you an idea of the difference between an obsolete requirement and a shortage requirement is that an obsolete requirement can take up to a year to fulfill. It can take months of testing. So often you will find that a part is bought, checked, verified, sent to a test house, brought back from the test house, checked, sent again, and then shipped to the customer, all in collaboration with the customer. A typical AS 6081 order takes 4 times as long, and that's one of the most recent quality certifications from the SAE, takes 4 times as long as a regular order. And you can imagine as well the cost of equipment and man-hours spent on these particular obsolete requirements is very intense, but that's what's required in this industry. And in terms of a hit rate or a success rate of solving obsolete requirements, currently we estimate 40% quoting is a good hit rate. So what's interesting about that is that the open market, generally speaking, gives opportunities for arbitrage on active components. And what I mean by that is that there is a possibility to take advantage of price differences in different markets. When it comes to obsolescence, the title of this talk talks about cost saving and obsolescence. Well, our view on that is that cost saving and obsolescence, if it appears in the open market where you're looking for a hard to find component that is near your original price, it's probably too good to be true. If you follow up that component, you have to consider the amount of testing and man hours going into sorting that component. If the price looks too good to be true, if the date code looks too good to be true, you're probably entering far too much risk than you should be taking on. really cost saving in obsolescence in the open market, there are no shortcuts. It's going back to what the academics recommend in terms of best practice. Strategic, proactive and reactive three-pronged approach to obsolescence management that has sponsorship from senior management, and in terms of obsolescence, in terms of counterfeit mitigation, a plan with a very clear awareness that it is risk mitigation that is the end game and end result. So this will be the last slide before I hand over to Jeff Williams at SiliconExpert for his section. But I'd like to draw your attention to a talk that's taking place next month at the University of Maryland, Kelsey's Symposium on Counterfeit Parts and Minerals. So the talk will be given by our colleague Bill Flegel, who's the Director of FOM in the Americas. And the talk is authored by Tyler Moore, who's the Director of End-of-Life Services and Supply Assurance at Arrow. Now, they are taking the approach of looking at the really extremely dynamic situation in the market with mergers and acquisitions. And the argument that their paper will make and their talk will make will that data is absolutely necessary to have in your armory as you approach the topic of obsolescence. You need to either have it and utilize it or have partners that can utilize and have it. And having one traditional source of data may not be enough because the situation is dynamic and changing so much. So, for example, a good independent distributor should have a data capability and a data science team that can give you as a customer a quarterly market outlook on the availability of your parts from secure sources in the open market. That capability currently exists. GUIDEP is the reporting structure in North America for counterfeit and conformance notifications. It's a very important source. In Europe, the aforementioned Anti-Counterfeiting Forum would be one of the sources for that kind of information that's very necessary to have. I mentioned Kelsey a number of times in the predictive algorithms that they have produced there. And of course, the SiliconExpert's own integrated lifestyle information data feeds as well. And Tyler and Bill will be arguing that these data sources should be looked at in combination to give a really comprehensive view on obsolescence risk mitigation. So with that, I'll hand over to Jeff for his section. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today and spending an hour of the longest day of the year with us all. Happy summer, everyone. So I'm the Regional Sales Manager for SiliconExpert. I'll be talking for a couple of minutes about the role of data as a proactive approach, prevention. As Enda just mentioned, any good obsolescence risk mitigation plan or program would need to have a solid foundation of data pertaining to the type of parts you use in general and the specific parts that you use in particular. So strong relationships, data feeds from reputable suppliers. There is, from month to month, there is more changes going on with existing parts within our database as there is adding a brand new part for the first time. It's a constant state of change. In terms of the types of data elements, obviously the life cycle status of a particular part is key, and there are various stages. It can start from preliminary, transition to active, not recommended for new design, go into last time buy with an obsolescence date in the future, and then discontinued once that obsolescence date has passed. And in some cases, we do see parts go straight from preliminary to discontinued if they don't gain enough traction in the marketplace and get discontinued. In addition to life cycle status, which takes a look at the specific situation for a given part number, the predictive years to end of life. We heard Enda mention the CALS program from the University of Maryland. That's what we do use, and it utilizes both market and technical considerations. At the end of the day, it's a very educated forecast on how many years a part is expected to be around before running the risk of going obsolete. In some cases, there's a key parametric driver, like with a DRAM. The size of it would certainly be a factor. They keep adding more memory into smaller packages. But yet, that type of approach would not work in a similar fashion to something like an op-amp, where there's not a key parametric driver. And then over the years, based on analysis and just feedback we've gotten from our customers, we've expanded to bring in other risk factors into the mix. Sometimes life cycle, if looked on its own merit in a vacuum, does not tell the whole story. There are cases where a part may, on paper, have plenty of years to end of life. It's active. But if it's a sole source part, an FPGA, a microcontroller, if there's no hint of franchised available inventory, well, then it's not as good as it may look if you were just to look at life cycle on its own. In a similar fashion, we've got the flip side of that. A part could be already obsolete. Its years to end of life is 0, and it may not get the worst overall risk analysis, because even though it is obsolete, there still may be plenty of inventory on a part. There may be plenty of drop-in replacements having inventory on the part. So the takeaway is active may not always be as good as it looks, and obsolete may not always be as bad as it looks once you look at the overall picture. And we do show that and track that at the individual part level. We have reports that aggregate that on entire AVLs and bills of materials. And then we also have an overall grading and health analysis that are based on those 4 factors that you'll see in a subsequent slide. In addition to having all of the data on parts that you're already using, it's important to keep up with that and to have proactive approaches through product change notices, PCNs, product discontinuance notices, so that you don't want to learn the hard way that a part has gone obsolete already when you go to buy it. Ideally you want to get ahead of that curve and be able to take the appropriate action, whether it's last time buys or redesign with ample time or whatever the case may be. Along with life cycle status, predictive end of life, and overall analysis and health grading, we also have counterfeit reporting. We primarily use GuideUp, Government Industry Data Exchange Program, for that source. We, in a similar fashion, like we'll tell you the status of a part today and what's its risk analysis going forward, we do the same thing with regard to counterfeit. If there's been a known report, a known counterfeit issue on a specific part number, we'll report that. But we've also done research into who's been targeted the most, what device types and what technologies, what's been the supply chain story and life cycle story of the parts that have been counterfeited. And as we heard Enda say a few moments ago, it's the older and the obsolete parts that tend to get counterfeited more than the brand new parts. It's parts with current and historical shortages in the authorized franchise distribution channels that tend to get counterfeited, which is, basic economics 101. The counterfeiters are rising to meet the unmet demand of the hard to find parts. And then key to all of this, as needed, is finding suitable replacements, whether a part is obsolete or high risk or perhaps non-compliant to a regulatory legislation, ROSE, REACH, conflict minerals, etc. The ability to find and analyze suitable replacements is key in any type of obsolescence mitigation strategy. In terms of PCNs, product change notices, and obsolescence notifications, that's often a key component for being able to keep up with future changes and in order to get an advance heads up on things. But what we found is, first of all, not every manufacturer uses obsolescence notices when they obsolete one of their parts, and even those that do may not use the PCN for every step along the way in the life cycle of one of their parts. For example, if a part goes from active to not recommended for new design, there may not always be a PCN associated with that. That's something that we would typically pick up by an e-feed from data from the supplier, or by analyzing and monitoring their websites. And not recommended for new design can mean different things with different suppliers. For most of them, it's a precursor to an upcoming obsolescence or last time buy event within the next a year or two. In other cases, they may indicate that their parts are not recommended for new design. However, they have no intention of discontinuing it in the foreseeable future. They may be promoting a newer part, but they will still make the older one for as long as people are buying them, as long as there is demand for the part. And furthermore, in many cases where a supplier will use a PCN, there is not much notice. 24%, the last order date was immediate, 8% was in a month, and with many customers, particularly aerospace and defense and medical electronics, that is not adequate time for a design change in the design cycle. And so it's marginally better than learning about it after the fact, to have things on such short notice. Within our application, in addition to analyzing the risk at the individual part lookup level and at the BOM level, we've come up with a way of assessing the health of an entire part library or an individual bill of material. And it's based on the same 4 risk factors mentioned on a previous slide, which is life cycle, multi-sourcing, environmental, and inventory. The default is 50% of the overall grade is based off of life cycle. That is a very key component of the overall analysis. Multi-sourcing is 20% of the overall score. To what extent is this part sole sourced versus multi-sourced? The supply chain story is another 20%. How many authorized sources are stocking the parts on my list? Has that been on the upswing or the downswing? And last but least is the environmental indication. Is this part compliant, yes or no? If no, did a supplier ever bother to make a compliant alternative? And if the answer is no in both of those cases, that does influence the score. Now, based on customer feedback, we've set it up so that users can actually tweak those percentages and come up with their own approach based on the characteristics of most important to them. And it was driven by the aerospace and defense industry, who in some cases need the leaded parts. They need the non-compliant ROSE-NO parts for aerospace applications. So they did not want an environmental risk factor to have a negative impact on their overall score. They knew going in that they would have non-compliance issues. It had to be that way. The report shows both part number detail as well as summary graphs. This is just a small partial screen of the overall report. It goes into different pie charts and bar graphs for the various 4 risk factors, the overall summary. There's opportunities for a design group to go in and change status and indicate things are in progress, or perhaps submit a support ticket for some research, additional research from SiliconExpert. And just like at the individual part number level, we show the current and the future status. The overall health and grading report has trending analysis. So in the bottom right, where you see the top red portion, it's a little small, but this is showing as of the time the report was run here in 2017, a small percentage of parts are already high risk or obsolete. But then going forward out through the next several years, that red section will grow as parts get closer to their end of life based on the forecast. So again, this is the approach that we have come up with, utilizing data that takes a look at the current situation, that does analysis based on projections and future trends at the individual part, aggregating the answers in a BOM, and then also coming up with an overall score. And with that, I will now pass the baton over to Mark. Take it away, Mark.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that, and I wanted to thank everybody for attending today. My name is Mark Baldiga. I'm the Global Commodity Manager for Integrated Circuits here at Converge. I've been at Converge for 19 years, with 12 of those years in this current role. I focus on providing data-driven, commoditized procurement, test, and inspection solutions for our high-rel customers. That's primarily in the aerospace and defense, medical, transportation, and volatile chemical industries. As Enda spoke about earlier, the single most important factor in keeping your supply chain secure from a counterfeit mitigation standpoint is prevention. The less you have to come to the open market, the more secure your supply chain is. And if everyone walks out of here with an understanding of only one additional thing today, that is what you should take out of here, is that prevention is the single most important factor in keeping your supply chain secure. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to touch on what happens when you do have to come into the open market. I could speak for many hours on how to best manage your open market presence, but for time's sake, I'm going to touch on just some of the higher points. There are basically two philosophies that you can have when you come into the open market as a manufacturing organization. You can either try and do this yourself based upon your own internal quality process, or you can partner up with an independent distributor or multiple independent distributors to be your agent in the open market for you. This would give you an advantage of tailoring how they operate to your internal quality processes, as well as taking advantage of the quality processes that they have in place. There are some other factors that make it better for you to choose an independent distributor. One of the most primary of those being reach. Most of these companies are global, and they do have strong presences in sourcing in multiple locations, different continents around the world. One of the first things that you have to tend to is providing engineering capabilities to determine whether there are crosses available, either from the manufacturer of the device you're looking for. There may be other manufacturers that manufacture usable devices. There may also be upgrades or downgrades available with upscreen operations. There may also be material conversions, leaded to lead-free conversions, or vice versa, as well as plating substitutions or even contact material substitutions. There are also multiple aftermarket manufacturers that have been licensed by the original equipment manufacturer, companies such as E2V, that are using original die and remanufacturing the parts themselves. All of these capabilities give you alternatives that may have authorized sources from authorized channels and material that is traceable back to the manufacturer. And you have to have a presence available to go through these steps prior to actually going out and sourcing in the open market. Once you do get to the position where you have to go into a procurement phase in the open market, you need to make sure that your partner has significant product and market expertise. You need to make sure that they understand whether these components are high risk in the market, or sometimes as simple as whether something's a one-time programmable device or not. They also need to know what the market is currently like for these devices. Are there market changes occurring which might make what are currently low-risk parts more attractive to counterfeiters and putting them into more of a high-risk category? And they also need to know and understand the market conditions to help you keep your pricing in line. There's nothing outside of an actual counterfeit itself that's more potentially damaging to your supply chain and the products you manufacture than going into the open market and having to pay sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 times the normal cost of a device, and then to add significant testing costs on top of that. They can put you underwater very, very quickly. The next point I'd like to make is knowing the understanding between non-authorized, non-traceable material and authorized traceable material. Just because a component is obsolete and you have to come into the open market does not mean that there's not material in the authorized channel or material that is traceable back to the manufacturer. It requires a significant reach and understanding of your open market supplier, along with the sourcing hierarchy that they need to go through when they are trying to procure parts from you. They need to go through direct channels, authorized channels. When nothing's available, they need to be able to look through a significant customer base of companies like yourselves that are one step away from the manufacturer or the authorized channel, either with trace or without trace. And when they do have to go into the open market with other independent distributors or brokers, they need to have a working understanding of those that are reliable and unreliable, which requires a strong regionalized sales and purchasing presence. One of the most important reasons to use independent distributors, as I mentioned earlier, is their global reach. You'd be amazed at how much obsolete material is sitting in an authorized distributor's inventory globally, whether it's dead, non-advertised, or bonded to customers that with the proper negotiations might be freed up for sale. This is a point not to be overlooked, and we very often find material on obsolete parts that is traceable at authorized sources after the part's been obsoleted. Another primary point, and this is the most significant piece of going into the open market once all of the authorized and traceable inventory possibilities have been exhausted, is that your partner has to have a rigorous supplier management system. It's the single most important aspect of open market sourcing. This supplier must have a regionalized sales and purchasing and product management capabilities. They need to know the players as well as having a significant enough purchasing history with these players to be able to analyze and manage their supplier trends as far as quality goes. The last point that I'm going to touch upon before I turn this over to Dwight Girardi is compliance. It's a very underrated but extremely significant piece of your open market presence. You need to make sure that you have suppliers that can handle ITAR regulations as well as DFARS that get flowed down. And this supplier must have significant working relationships with the Department of Commerce and the Department of Homeland Security. With that now, I'm going to hand this off to Dwight Girardi to discuss quality and counterfeit avoidance.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. I wanted to start with the fact that I've been working at Converge for over 25 years, 15 of which have been in my current position in the quality field. And I say that only because this has really given me a vantage point in seeing global trends and best practices. So with that, I'd like to briefly share some of my main recommendations to anyone approaching the open market around quality management systems and counterfeit avoidance management plans. All open market distributors should be certified to some type of quality management system, whether it be an ISO or an AS, in order to ensure that they have documented processes in place and the structure needed to provide you, the customer, with what you ordered and, most importantly, with quality products. In addition, they should have a counterfeit control program in place as well, which includes inspection and test processes to help detect and stop suspect counterfeit product from ever entering the supply chain. The most well-known, I think, that are out there that are available are from the Independent Distributors Electronics Association, or IDEA. They have their 1010 inspection standard, which has been around for quite a while, which is very good at helping inspect parts and weed out suspect counterfeit product, as well as the SAE's AS6081, which has been out there for the last few years, which is also very good. I actually sit on the G19D committee of SAE, who is in the process of revising AS6081 at the moment, coming out with a revision A. And we also collaborate with other committees who create new standards, such as the AS6171. They kind of go hand in hand. So it's good to be immersed into the industry and hear what's going on and help create some of these documents and revise some of these existing standards. With 6081, we've been certified for a few years, and we see customers that use it quite comprehensively, while other customers use just elements of it, mainly the test level A inspection portion. But the main point here is that we at Converge, we follow an anti-counterfeiting process that is really designed in collaboration with our customers. We work with our customers, they tell us what they need and what they want, and we advise and contribute, but essentially follow their lead. In addition, the other thing is good open market suppliers will or should have an electrostatic discharge and a moisture sensitive device programs that are either compliant or certified to industry standards. You really want to make sure that products are being handled the way they're supposed to be handled according to the industry standards. But by being involved in industries such as IDEA and the SAE, as I mentioned above, it's important to stay aware of trends in the marketplace, as well as help shape positive change. This goes back to the point of community being a very big key part of this whole process. And as Mark pointed out, it's always best to procure from original or authorized sources. However, when you need to go to the open market, find a supplier that has not only your best interest in mind, but the best practices as well to help secure your supply chain. Essentially, trust but verify. Visit and audit your open market suppliers. The open market is both opportunity and risk, and you want to apply a careful approach based on risk management. So thank you for the opportunity and the time to speak. Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you.
And I'm afraid you might be muted.
Yeah, there's no sound.
Oh, excuse me. Very quickly, Laura, because we don't have much time. The conclusions, obsolescence cases are rising linked to mergers and acquisitions. Unfortunately, counterfeiters follow obsolescence. There's an opportunity with both the risk and the open market. If you see cost savings around obsolescence, think twice and check twice. Choose your partner carefully. And as Jeff illustrated, embrace data sources. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, and I also wanted to draw attention to the FOM event that's taking place in Amsterdam as well as Los Angeles. Enda, would you like to speak on that for just a moment?
Sure, Laura. So it's a pairing of events. The first one is taking place in Amsterdam, and you can see the dates there. And amongst the speakers are Siemens, Thales, Professor Peter Sanborn, Arrow, and Safran. And it's very much an environment and a community where there's a lot of debate and exchange, and a workshop that takes place the day before. A week later, some of the FOM team will leave the European event and go to Long Beach in California, where Microsemi, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE, Arrow, Celestica, and also Professor Sanborn will again join for more debate and conference and talks and networking. So thanks for the opportunity to highlight those events, Laura, that are coming up later this year.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you to our speakers. So we just have a few more moments, and we can go over the hour, but I do want to respect everyone's time. So just a reminder that any questions that you submit will be answered offline and sent out to the attendees as well as posted online. So please feel free to submit your questions using the GoToWebinar control panel. Just give me a moment. I'll begin to read over those and repeat them for our speakers. So one of the questions is, what testing is actually performed by Converge when they perform AS6081 testing?
Hi, this is Dwight. I can answer that question. Going off the top of my head here, test level A in the 6081 starts out with documentation and packaging inspection. Then it goes into visual inspection. And one of the major changes to that is the sample sizes. You've got a minimum lot day code sample size of 122 pieces and an X-ray sample size of 45 pieces. So after the visual inspection comes X-ray, and then you have heated solvent testing, regular solvent testing, acetone, and then you have the heated solvent testing, which is the 1M2P and the Dynasolve 750. Decap is also mandatory. We also perform what's called a scrape test, and that's more from the IDEA 1010, but we also perform that as well, and that's another indicator if the parts have been blacktopped or not. So off the top of my head, that's what test level A includes. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dwight. So a question for Jeff. What is SiliconExpert sourced for confirmed counterfeit reports?
That would be GIDEP, Government Industry Data Exchange Program.
Okay, thank you. All right, just time for one or two more here. Question for Mark: does Converge offer authentication? Thank you. I am stuttering on my own words here. Test review services.
If I'm understanding the question to be, do we inspect and authenticate devices that were not procured by us? That's the approach that I'm going to take to that. And yes, there are services that we offer where we will work on authenticating devices that you may have procured from someone else. We take that case by case. There are some factors, that it's not something that we like to do. It puts us in a situation where we're acting just as a test house. That's not what we do. We do provide our testing and authenticity services for our customers. We do that at a highly reduced cost based on the ongoing relationship that we have with our customers. But there are cases where we will do that for customers.
Okay, thank you. Are there any particular component types or materials that are within scope or out of scope of the EOL analysis services?
Mm.
And if you feel like there's a better resource or expert on the matter, we can get that expert to answer the questions as well afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the analysis, one thing I would say is that we won't source caps from the open market at all. We will no bid them because we feel the ability to test those doesn't allow us to really stand behind the quality. So Converge will always no bid unless they're fully traceable. So I think that product range is outside of the range of the data analysis that we do, because if we're asked for those components and they're not immediately available and present, we'll no bid. Is there anything to add to that, Mark?
I would say that technology products is something that we're probably not doing a lot of analysis on. The majority of parts that we're doing our analysis on is integrated circuits, CPUs, and memory added into that.
Okay, this is our last question that we can answer today, but just a reminder, we'll answer all these questions offline and send you a copy, as well as send you a copy of the presentation and the recording. The last question is, can someone please clarify how services provided by a company like IHS compare to the services provided by today's presenters, SiliconExpert and Converge?
This is Jeff. I mean, at the end of the day, there are more similarities than differences between the two. However, the areas where we've had multiple competitive analysis and the feedback we've gotten falls really into 4 areas. That is data coverage, data accuracy, tool ease of use, and support after the sale. So data coverage, meaning take my list of parts, run it through the 2 services and see who has the best coverage. We have repeatedly been found more favorable in that regard. Data accuracy is very key. If one service says something is obsolete and the other says it's active or vice versa, that's another key evaluation point that we fared well in. Tool ease of use, getting up to speed with the use of the tool, graphical user interface, intuitiveness is another key area. And also the service after the sale. There's Arrow acquired SiliconExpert 5 years ago. They've put money into us since acquiring us, and so I believe we just have more people behind the scenes that are working to keep the database current and relevant. If there's anyone on the call that has not seen SiliconExpert or they're familiar with a similar service and they want to do a comparison, there is an opportunity as part of the post feedback and follow-up to see a demo or to have a health bomb grade risk analysis done on a list of parts, and I think it would be more suitable to sort of deal with that on a more individual basis.
Good. And Laura, the question was addressed to both SiliconExpert and Converge, so just a very short note on the data capabilities that Converge have. Similarly to SiliconExpert, we've had investment from Arrow, and we're using theory and algorithms that Arrow have developed over many years and applying those to the open market. So that is what our data science team is busy with. It allows customers to bring lists of obsolete parts or lists of excess parts to Converge and have them analyzed in an automated way, line by line, and that's unique at the moment in the open market. So this isn't a service that would be available through a traditional data source. So that's the Converge piece of that answer.
Thank you, both of you. So that concludes our webinar. Just want to give an invitation to everyone to request a demo to see SiliconExpert in action, also receive a complimentary bomb grading report, as well as to contact Converge and see how they can provide solutions for you and your business. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.